This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the acclaimed documentary Most Likely to Succeed and author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
I'm Josh Rapoon, and this is the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast. Season 1 of this podcast series was hugely successful, with more than 13,000 downloads in 39 countries worldwide. Clearly, we tapped into a global hunger for ideas and stories from creative, imaginative, innovative, and curious educators and education leaders engaging students across the Hawaiian Islands. Here in August 2020, I am proud to say we have successfully launched Season 2. The first episode was my conversation with the remarkable Matthew Lynch, Director of Sustainability Initiatives at the University of Hawaii. Today I'll be talking with the equally remarkable Lory Peroff, a teacher at Waikiki Elementary, which sits in the cool morning shadows of the iconic Diamond Head crater just east of Waikiki and Kapiolani Park on the island of Oahu. Lory Peroff has served in the Peace Corps in Uzbekistan and Tonga. She has taught 4th and 5th grade in Honolulu and in Taiwan. Her undergraduate degree from the University of Colorado is in the arts and psychology. She has a master's in elementary education from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, where she earned a 4.0 GPA. While at the University of Colorado, she did an exchange program in Ghana, West Africa. Lory has lived and worked on multiple continents. Her worldview is expansive, and she has great range. Lory is an advocate for teachers as writers and has written extensively on life and learning for Honolulu Civil Beat, Medium, Education Week, and the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. She is a distance swimmer and runner and loves to travel. Most of all, Lory is hugely respected in public, private, and charter school circles in Hawaii. Her voice is clear and strong. She is #public school proud and a leading light for whole child instruction. And now, here's my conversation with Lory Peroff. Lory, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, so happy to be here. Thank you so much.
So, Lory, our format is 10 questions. So for the next hour or so, I'll fire 10 questions at you, and you just knock them out of the park, okay?
All right, sounds good.
All right, so question number 1. Lory, I know this might catch our listeners by surprise, especially educators who know you. But let's start these questions in Uzbekistan, which sits near the heart of Eurasia between Russia and Europe. 20 years ago, you served in the Peace Corps for about a year in Uzbekistan. And during that year, you established the first ever GLOW camp for Uzbek girls. So what is GLOW, G-L-O-W, and tell us the story of what you implemented.
Oh, thank you for asking that question. This brings me back to glory days. GLOW stands for Girls Leading Our World. And we were a relatively new posting for Peace Corps. So we had only had Peace Corps in that country for less than 10 years. We were not well known in Uzbekistan as Peace Corps was in other parts of the world. So we came in and a group of young people just finding our footing and hoping to do some good. And we met people and we realized, wow, there's a need here. And there was these wonderful girls that we were meeting in our classes and meeting in our communities that were talking to us. That maybe they didn't have an opportunity to talk in that way to anyone else up until that time in their life. So a group of about 15 Peace Corps volunteers came together and hatched this idea of, let's do a camp. Let's bring girls together where we can talk about things about, gender, expectations, dreams, goals, hopes. Let's do athletics, which some of these girls had never done. And let's just see what happens. And so we all came together in a little town in the mountains, and we took these it must have been about 60 girls, about 15 to 20 American volunteers, and we stayed together for a week, and we talked to them. We did workshops, we did community building, we did sharing, we played games, we did tug of war, we played Frisbee. And these are things that these girls, some of them had never, ever done. This is a place where Uzbekistan has a very, very special place in my heart. And there's so many wonderful things about it. But there's also things that, are a challenge for women. Girls, so it's very Russified in that Islam is practiced and there are Muslim people, but it had been kind of suppressed for many, many years under the Soviet rule. So girls were wearing what they called a ramal, like they were wearing headscarves, but they could not do the call to prayer openly because of the history of the country. So it was this really interesting place to be. And I was just out of college, really learning so much and so many questions that it was eye-opening. So we got these girls together, and I learned about them, and they learned about us. And it was one of the most impactful experiences of my life. And I still stay in contact with many of those girls and many of those Peace Corps volunteers. And one of the most vivid memories for me was just playing Frisbee with these girls. They first had never seen a Frisbee. Second, they had never played just for playing. And one girl came up to me and said, this is the most fun I've ever had. I don't usually laugh. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. And then I think that things changed at September 11th when my service tour was cut short beyond my control. Usually Peace Corps is a 2-year service. But when 9/11 happened, we went into stand fast and consolidation and evacuation, and I left very, very quickly without properly having the opportunity to say goodbye to a lot of the people that meant a lot of things to me. So, but since then, the past 20 years, people have found me through social media, and it's just an incredible feeling when I have a student of mine from 20 years ago that says, "Hey, Miss Walker," I was Walker at the time, "I remember you. You taught me poetry. I remember you. You taught me how to play Frisbee. I remember you. We had so much fun together." And it's just something that I feel so fortunate to have been a part of.
Wow, I experienced something similar to that recently when a former student of mine from 26 years ago at Punahou dialed me up on Facebook. His name is Kevin, and revealed to me that he had become a social studies teacher, partly inspired by the time we had spent together. And whew, boy, that's an emotional moment, Lory, right? When you find out something like that.
You just, I think in the day-to-day, there's so many things you troubleshoot and so many failures every day. And I think many teachers, myself included, it's very easy to look at the things that didn't go the way we wanted them to. And you don't get that instant gratification on the daily. But when you have students reach out and say, I remember you. You taught me this. Or I remember you. Now I do this because you encouraged me to do it. And it doesn't happen the next day. It doesn't happen the next year, sometimes 20 years later. but it happens. And that's when you think, oh, this is why I'm still here doing this work.
Right. Lory, how was your experience implementing a GLOW program in Tonga, which was another of your Peace Corps experiences? How is that similar or how is that different?
It was very different. But there were similarities. In Uzbekistan, girls, the culture in Uzbekistan was very, very different than the culture in Tonga. Some ways that it was different. Girls in Uzbekistan were homemakers, and there was, they took care of the home until they were married, and then once they were married, they took care of their home and their husband's family as well. There's something called a kaylin. Once you're married and you're a new bride, you're called a kaylin. And the kaylin had a lot of responsibilities. And it was something that I learned through my time there, that being a kaylin was not always something that a young woman survived. A lot of women would choose to end their lives during that time because of the pressures on them, perhaps abuse from their husbands and also their mother-in-laws. But it was very much a part of, it was common knowledge. This was a thing that we had. In Tonga, in contrast, women were very powerful in their families. A lot of times the women were, they ruled the roost in the families, and they were prominently respected members of society. And women, in my experience, took care of women. The similarities between Uzbekistan and Tonga were that women stuck to themselves. Women and men didn't interact the way they do in the West. So in Uzbekistan, men and women wouldn't be socializing. Men and women wouldn't do things like exercise together. In class, boys and girls wouldn't be in the same group. In Tonga, it's also similar. Boys and girls, men and women have their own separate kind of circles that they function in. Women do a lot of the homemaking and a lot of the cooking, and the men have other responsibilities, the farming. But there's kind of, in my experience I saw in Tonga, there was a nurturing of women. Women nurtured each other, whereas in Uzbekistan, it was an interesting kind of cycle of oppression where women would suppress each other. So in the GLOW camp in Uzbekistan, we would talk about, well, let's support each other. We are here, we are women, we have this in common. Now we need to break the cycle to support each other so we can, fulfill our dreams and goals and feel safe. In Tonga, it was more getting women to think outside the box, because women had very prescribed duties. And so it was, talking about, okay, so this is what you do in your daily life. This is what your mother has done. There was a lot of weaving. Women were responsible for weaving. What are some other things you might be interested in doing? And would that be okay in your community? So in that regard, there were similarities and differences. Women in Tonga were, by and large, more joyful, more exuberant, more willing to share and speak out, but still kind of, constrained by societal expectations of what a woman does and doesn't do.
Right. Wow, that's so fascinating. So
it was so fascinating.
I can imagine. So, Lory, question number 2, and we're going to shift, geographies here. I'm super interested in the work you did in 2004 at the Franciscan Children's Hospital in Boston, in something called a latency program. So the dictionary defines latency as the state of existing but not yet being developed or manifest. So what was that Boston program, and how did it serve the needs of kids in Massachusetts?
Wow, that's a great question. This is so fun. I'm loving going a trip down memory lane.
Yep.
Sometimes I forget that all these things kind of make me who I am today, and I love thinking back on them. So I had just returned from Peace Corps in Tonga. I was back in Boston, and I was looking for a job, and I happened to find one right down the street from me at the Franciscan Children's Hospital in the psychiatric ward. I felt so underqualified. I couldn't believe I got the position. It was a locked unit. I was working with young children. So latency, I'm not sure how they came up with that, but I worked with the younger kids. I would say 12 and under, and they were also adolescents in the same locked unit, but we were separated by kind of a hallway. And I worked with students who had been removed from school because they were unsafe to themselves or others. And now remember, these are kids mostly under 10.
Right.
And I was there as a liaison between their school to make sure that they, continued to receive their right to a free public education. And so I spoke a lot with teachers. I spoke a lot with counselors. I spoke a lot with parents. And I spent time, in the ward with the students. Now, when I first arrived, I had inherited the position from a woman who had built it up to this beautiful situation for the kids, but she left, and I was not her. So we kind of stumbled through it. It was one of the most eye-opening experiences of my entire life. I had 10-year-olds who, routinely wet the bed, defecated in the bed, would, one student in particular would throw it around. I mean, and these are the kids that need help, right? And here I am. I have a bachelor's in psychology and just a heart full of hope. And I went in there and I started a program that I still use today with my students. And it's the simplest thing you could ever do. I just called it Walk and Talk with Lory. And we would, if they demonstrated, that they were safe for a certain amount of time, they would earn an opportunity to walk outside the locked ward and outside in the hospital grounds and just talk.
Wow.
Just talk. And it was the most, it was the biggest incentive. They just wanted to be outside in the air, maybe go on the swings. And so I found that just that walking and talking was so simple and so profound. And it's kind of guided me through, my whole career. It's like kids just want to be heard. And not being heard can bring a lot of trauma. And it's very healing. They also need to move their bodies. So those two things together have been just a simple recipe for healing, and it was a really profound experience. And I still remember some of my students, and, some of them would stay for months, just months and months and months. And some of them didn't have family to visit them. It was, it was something I will never forget. And I'm grateful for what I learned from those students and those kids who just need to be heard. They need to move their bodies, and they need to know that someone cares about them.
Wow, Lory, that's so fascinating. I feel like I'm on a train trip with you, and out ahead of us on this train trip is your experiences as a teacher, but where we've come from is Uzbekistan and Tonga and Boston, and that you're being informed as a person along the way. And, you are becoming who you are today. And I'm so fascinated by that idea of, Oftentimes I wonder that students come directly out of high school, right into college, go directly into a teacher training program, and don't have any experiences when they hit the classroom, in life. And so we'll get to that a little bit later. But this is a perfect segue to the next question, which is at both Moanalua Elementary and Waikiki Elementary, you work to implement a program called Philosophy for Children, aka P4C. You wrote, Lory, in Honolulu Civil Beat in 2016, and I quote, I would like to invite a skeptic or even a non-skeptic into my classroom during our P4C time. I would encourage this person to listen and engage in the activity. This observer will notice the joy with which students form a tight-knit circle. The observer will notice how the students enthusiastically raise their hands to answer the question and, despite their excitement, respectfully lower their hands when a peer is talking. This observer will hear the voice of the child who hasn't shared anything in class this year until joining the P4C circle and be amazed at what he has to say. Trying to assess the value of P4C in the classroom is like trying to measure love. Some things aren't measurable. Some things speak for themselves. So, Lory, what is P4C? How does it work? And what steps can other teachers take to try it? And sorry, multi-part question. In what ways does it manifest something we talk a lot about in education, which is student voice?
Yeah. Well, I feel, again, kind of unqualified to be the person to speak to this, but if love for the program and belief in the program is any measurement of qualification to speak on its behalf, I will do that. But there are so many other leaders of P4C and mentors I've had that I've learned from: Dr. Toby Yost, Dr. Jackson, Amber Makael, Dr. Ben, Ben Lukey. So those are wonderful resources for people as well. But P4C, to me, is, if the only thing you do all year is philosophy for children, you've done your job as a teacher. In my mind, I try to simplify it. P4C is teaching children to listen with empathy, to speak clearly and respectfully and thoughtfully, think deeply about what they're saying and what others are saying, and to maintain a safe community. So I've said this for a decade. If after the year of being with me as your teacher, if you leave the classroom being able to listen, speak, think, and maintain a safe community, then I've done my job. And P4C is a way to do that. And you have to be quite explicit in the way you talk about those goals. So at P4C, you sit in a circle. It's a student-led inquiry. The students will generate their own questions. And as I mentioned in the piece I wrote in Civil Beat, there is no off-limits topic. In fact, if a topic comes up that's touchy or challenging, or you think, ooh, maybe the parents won't like this one, even better, because the kids need to talk, and they need to talk about it safely. They need to listen to their peers. They need to be safe in agreeing and disagreeing, and they need to think deeply about that topic. So the students come up with the questions. We vote as a community on what question we will discuss that day, and we just talk. And two things I've implemented recently that have kind of shaped my P4C practice are: I start the class with, we review the 4 pillars: listening, speaking, thinking, and being safe. And every time, and we do this every week, every single time I'll say, who can tell me what this means? And every time a different student will say something beautiful, every single time. And also by doing that, it creates an opportunity for students to hear the answers repeatedly. And some of those quieter students will raise their hand because, hey, I've already heard this question 20 times. I know the answer. And you'll see that it kind of brings in students that might be reluctant to answer a question that they haven't heard before. So it's very repetitive. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is I say, okay, we're going to practice our listening now. And I read a poem. And I usually read a poem that I love. And it's a different poem every week. And I always tell them, boys and girls, this is not a fourth grade poem. It's a poem that I love. And I think any person could love it. You might not understand it. But just listen. It doesn't hurt to just fill the air with beautiful words and just listen, and we'll react. So I'll read something and we'll get some reactions. And that's that's just our listening practice. And then from there, we'll go into choosing our questions. So I've found that to be an interesting addition to my personal P4C practice. But P4C is lovely because it can be very personal. Somebody might like to start in a different way. But I found that poetry has worked for me. But I can't say enough about P4C. And some people I've had come do trainings and say, well, isn't it just sitting in a circle and talking? Well, yes and no. It is. But there's quite a depth in the way we explicitly teach the thinking, speaking, listening, and safety. There's a Good Thinkers Toolkit that's available online that I use a lot. But yes, in some ways it is just sitting in a circle and listening to what the students have to say about a topic of their choice.
So, Lory, if I'm a elementary school teacher and I've never heard of P4C, and I might be a little bit reticent about just going to a website and trying to figure it out, like what steps can I take to maybe try it if I'm sparked by what I've just heard from you?
Right. Okay. Okay. There are, it's, in a sense, it is just sitting in a circle, but there's so many resources. There's the Ue Hero Academy at UH that has resources. But if you're just in your classroom and you thought, wow, P4C, I heard about that, or this girl's talking about it, what would be a simple first step? And here's what I think would be easy. And now we're in the virtual era, so it's different. But you just ask the students, what question would you like to talk about today? It can be anything. And you just generate a list of questions. I just did this on Monday with my own students. And I'm looking at my list of questions because I'm here in my classroom. And here are some of them. What if the world was made of candy? What if everything was made of food? What if you could switch bodies?
Wow.
What if money grew on trees? What if you could stop time?
Wow.
What if you could talk to animals? So you'll get these questions. Students have questions. So you might just have them, in a virtual classroom or face-to-face, just write your questions. And then compile them in a visible way. Either face-to-face, you can do it on a whiteboard. Virtually, you can just type them all out on the screen, and you say, let's vote. What do we want to talk about today? And you take a vote. And after you take the vote, then you say, in order to have a really enriching conversation and discussion, to hear all your ideas, we have to talk about listening, speaking, thinking, and being safe. So bring those up right away. And that might take some time.
Right.
And then say, okay, let's talk. And then you just talk about that question right there. But every time you come up with a new question, talk about the listening, speaking, thinking, and safe community. And I call them pillars. They're and they kind of hold up the whole community. And I have on occasion said, which one of these is most important? Just find a partner and talk about that. Or if you're in a virtual classroom, go to a breakout room if that's available to you and discuss which one of these four things is most important. And they come back and it's usually like, well, if you don't listen, then you won't know how to speak clearly because you're not reflecting. You're not thinking about what other people are saying, and that itself leads to really enriching conversations. So, just do it. That would be my advice. Just do it, and then as you go along, reach out to some resources and kind of build along the way. But it is student-led, and that's something I think that is easy to, might be hard to let go of control. So if you're going to talk about what if you could switch bodies, you just go for it. If you're going to talk about what if money grew on trees, just go for it. That's what they want to talk about, and honor that.
You know, Lory, the question that I would have asked if I were in your class, I'm 62 now, but if I were in your class today, the question that I would have asked would have been about talking to animals. And you would have discovered really quickly that I had read all the Dr. Dolittle books, and that this question of talking to animals is a serious one. What does that mean to talk to animals? You know, it's an empathy question. So that just gave me goosebumps when you were talking about that. Thank you. I hope that educators listening to this podcast will be sparked by this and will reach out. And even if it's just across the aisle or across to another classroom nearby, or a teacher who's nearby. And if you've heard about it, just reach out and ask about it, and then go forward from there. That's very, very cool. Awesome. So Lory, at Hale Kula Elementary, over 4 years between 2006 and 2010, you implemented 2 programs, the Hope Garden Learning Project and the Children Helping Children Project. So what were these 2 projects, and how did they develop the skills and habits and dispositions of the kids involved?
Oh, this is so fun. The first one I'll talk about is the Hope Garden, and Hale Kula is now called Daniel K. Inouye. It's on Schofield Barracks, and most of the students are military-impacted students. At the time I was teaching there, they had either one or both parents serving overseas. It was a very, these kids had a lot on their plate. So I can't take any of the credit. The person who had the idea was my amazing colleague, Teresa Kramer, one of the loveliest people you could ever meet. She's a special educator, and she's very interested in gardening, and her husband is as well. And it was just as simple as, hey, do you want to start a garden? Yeah, let's do it. Let's ask Jan Iwase, one of the most amazing administrators and people you could ever imagine. And Jan said, sure, I think that sounds like a good idea. Next day, literally next day, it was a Saturday. Teresa's husband is out with not just like shovels, but like a whole like drivable tractor hoe, digging up like a 20 by 20 tract of land to create our garden. It was not small. And so we just had this land, and we just started planting. So I think we took it step by step. Teresa and I did a lot of the upkeep of the garden initially as we got it going, but we had a farm stand. We tried new foods. Some students, I remember so clearly, that's how broccoli grows? I've never seen that. I thought it was on trees, like things like that. And it was awesome because part of our routine, our daily routine, was going outside and watering, weeding, and harvesting. And there was no like strict schedule, it was just, this is what has to be done. Let's do it. And we did it. And it was not always neat and tidy. There were some, kids spraying each other with water and, all that kind of stuff. But, when the year was over, when we first started that, the students in the reflections, almost everyone said, what do you remember from this year? The garden. I remember the garden.
Right.
And we integrated so many different subjects. We went out and we wrote in the garden. This was at the beginning of my teaching career, and I just did things that I didn't know I couldn't do. So we were like chopping up dead fish, and we were trying to say, okay, which fertilizer works? The Native American putting the dead fish in the ground, or the store-bought fertilizer, and we do science. And, we got complaints about the smell, and it was but it was authentic, and it was fun. And, I'm just so grateful that I had an administrator that supported our vision. And I think the students were the ones who benefited from it.
That's awesome. I think I think that you should write another article, and the title should be "Doing Things I Didn't Know I Couldn't Do." That's a great one.
And Josh, I agree, because I think right now we're right back where I'm right back where I was, 12 years ago. I mean, it's time to do things that you don't know you can't do yet, because it's a whole new landscape.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. So what about the Children Helping Children project?
Oh, yes. This was another one. I didn't know what kind of the limitations or liability was involving this, but I just reached out to the Kaka'ako Next Step Homeless Shelter and said, hey, what do you guys need? And they sent me over a list, and they sent over a woman from the shelter that gave us a presentation, and we did a donation drive where we collected hygiene items, shampoo, conditioner. There was a whole list of them. And then it was really cool because at first it was pretty simple. That first year we collected, we made these goodie bags, and we actually went to the shelter. We drove in a car that I drove myself with all the goodie bags, and it was after school, and I had about 10 families that elected to join, and we went to the shelter and delivered these things and got a tour of the shelter and met the students that we were donating them to. So that was the first year. The second year we did it again, and I was able to kind of integrate some more content where we then, we sorted all our donations, we graphed our donations, how much shampoo did we get and how much conditioner, let's make a graph. So it's kind of evolved. The next year we went to the shelter again and dropped off, and we did a tour, and those tours were, to me, very, very impactful, and to the students, because when you go in, it's a warehouse, and the physical space that a family lives in is something like 6 feet by 6 feet, and it's just all these like makeshift wooden walls that have been erected for these families. And my students could see where a family of 4 was living in a 6 by 6 cubicle, and they could actually meet the real children living there. Now, what liability was this? I don't know. I might pause a little bit today, but then I didn't. We just went, and they saw a real homeless shelter, and they saw what it really looks like to live in that space. And it's been going for a while. I took a brief. I went and taught overseas, and then I returned and I started it up again. And I found out that Kaka'ako Homeless Shelter no longer has children. They have a different facility for children. So last year we took our donations to the facility that services children. We did another tour with families that came after school with me, just another carpool. And, I think it's important to not just do there's a lot of food drives and things that we do in school, but it's like, okay, great, I brought in my canned items. Where are they going?
Right.
To add that second part of it, like, here's a child living here who is going to take a shower tonight using the shampoo and conditioner that you donated to them because they don't have enough money to buy it themselves. Right. And this is really a human that you're helping. And just to make that kind of connection, I think is important. And I think that that's what we should be doing as much as possible. It's just going that next step, but not making it symbolic, but making it real, see the real person and see the real space so that then you can understand. And I've had families throughout the years that still donate to these shelters because they started it in our class. And that's a really nice feeling. And some of them have even said, and I went there for Christmas to serve the food. So to just kind of start that connection is really just so rewarding for me, because actually it's quite simple, but it's impactful.
Indeed. And so a lifelong disposition in that case would end up being to actually know what's going on when you make a donation to something. And that's like super important over your whole life, that you would live like that and that you would understand people in that way. That's very, very unique. So Lory, we're actually at question number 5 here, and then we'll take a break. So I am deep into the recently published book by Pasi Sahlberg and Bill Doyle titled Let the Children Play. Sahlberg and Doyle come out of the gate in this book like a couple of, super amped up MMA fighters. They're swinging really hard at stressful standardized testing, stressful test prep, rigid siloed learning, and most importantly, the elimination of play in our schools in favor of academic preparation. So implicit in their argument right out of the gate is a critique of standardization. So, Lory, what are your thoughts about all of this? What are your thoughts about play and about where we've come to, here in 2020 in terms of elementary school education?
Yeah, that's a big question. So many people, myself included, I'm kind of in some ways old school, are tied to the standards. You need to know your multiplication facts and you need to recite them quickly. But in my case, it's interesting because I think I know how important play is, but I still have this nagging little part of me, especially with my own children. Like, why don't you know your multiplication table? So it's kind of this give and take and push and pull. But I think that it would be books like this are so important to help educators kind of validate, yes, what you feel is important in play and what you feel is important in group work and collaboration and creativity and all those amazing activities that you create with those in mind. Those are not just fillers. Those are the real learning is taking place there, and kind of help us free ourselves from the, being constrained by, I have to hit XYZ standards, because I think that we are hitting the standards when we're doing these activities. I do an activity every year, and this year I have to be extremely innovative in implementing this because of the way learning is now. But it's called Cardboard Challenge. And basically what you do is you bring in a bunch of cardboard, some, a hot glue and whatever other materials you want, and you make a cardboard game. And we do that for 2 weeks. And the classroom is a disaster. And this little part of me in my mind is thinking, oh man, what about the multiplication tables? What about fractions? But it's all there. It's all there. So I think that when we get more research and we get more experts saying, yes, play, you learn from play, students learn from play, it will help the teachers be better teachers, right? We won't feel so compelled like, I'm not doing my due diligence when I let them do this activity where they're playing and troubleshooting and failing and their cardboard thing is crumpling down to the ground and your classroom is full of stuff everywhere and the janitors, 2 weeks you have to keep bringing them, like stones because your classroom is such a disaster. That is a meaningful learning unit. They are learning all the things you want them to learn, except for now they're totally engaged rather than sit and fill out this worksheet so that I can grade it and put it in my grade book. So these types of resources that are coming out are, I think, improving the educational system so that teachers can kind of finally say, oh, yes, what I thought was important is important, and now it becomes, how do we measure it? Because there's always that question of how do we assess? So that's a discussion that educators need to get into is, how do I assess this learning when it looks so different than a test or a worksheet, but those are all rich discussions that we should be having and many people are having. So it's, I think that feel really validated when I have learned more research and books that are coming out about the importance of play. Actually, last year at YCT School, our amazing principal, Bonnie Tabor, experimented with a day of play. So it was this hotly debated topic, in our staff meetings of, should we do it? How do we do it? What do we do? And essentially she just said, let's just do it. And all day, students had free reign of the campus, and they just played. They did whatever they wanted. And the one rule we had was, don't intervene unless it's a safety issue. And for a whole school day, the kids roamed around, talking with each other, playing with each other. And it was beautiful. But it's so interesting that was a huge, milestone for the school, to let the kids play.
Right.
But it was a step in the right direction.
Wow, that's remarkable. And there wasn't anything during that day that needed to be measured, right, Lory?
No, I mean, it spoke for itself. The kids, I mean, they hadn't been, I have my own 2 daughters at Waikiki School, and that day was, by all accounts, the best day ever. So that's enough for me.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fantastic. So, okay. Hey, everybody, stay with us. After this short break, we will come back with more questions for Lory Peroff. Stay with us.
This is Guy Kawasaki. If you want to learn how to be a remarkable person, please check out my podcast, Remarkable People. I interview people like Roy Yamaguchi, Margaret Atwood, Jane Goodall, Stephen Wolfram, Steven Pinker, Ariana Huffington, and Steve Wozniak. The point of the podcast is to help you become a little bit more remarkable. To learn more, go to remarkablepeople.com. Thank you.
Hawaii's business people and professionals want to support our public high school students across the state, like me, Law Yagodich, a senior at Ku'uku High School. And Hawaii's teachers and other educators want classroom speakers, curriculum advice, contest judges, mentors, and other support from businesses and nonprofits. The Climb High Bridge is Hawaii Department of Education's official platform to connect the two communities. It's like Match.com, specifically designed to connect businesses and schools. Learn more by sending an email to info@climbhigh.org. That's spelled CLIMBHI.org.
Hi, friends. Toy Hirschman here from the Entre Ed Talk podcast. I am super excited to support the What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast hosted by none other than the amazing Josh Rappoon. And I also want to give a big shout out to all of the incredible educators in Hawaii who are doing unreal things in the entrepreneurship and design-based thinking spaces. I hope you all subscribe and listen to What School Could Be in Hawaii. And also, hey, why not check out the Entre Ed Talk podcast, where we interview stellar entrepreneurial educators and entrepreneurs from across the country and globe. I cannot wait to connect with you.
Hey everyone, we are back with Waikiki elementary educator and education writer Lory Peroff. So Lory, question number 6. In January of 2018, you began writing an education column in one of our local online newspapers, Honolulu Civil Beat. So I want to tackle this fact in 2 parts. So here's part 1. So share with us a few of the columns you were most proud of or happy about, or that had the most interesting reactions from your readers?
Well, I guess I'll start by saying I was totally shocked that I was even invited to have the opportunity to write the Civil Beat, and extremely grateful. The way it came about is I just kept writing Community Voice. I kept sending in submissions for Community Voice because I just like writing. And eventually, after so many, they said, hey, do you want to try to, write a column? And I thought, are you kidding? Like me? But, of course, that was like my dream come true. And the first column I wrote, I got the idea actually from Cece, our current Teacher of the Year, Hawaii State Teacher of the Year. And it was just in a conversation. We were talking about all the articles and pieces that were written about why teachers are leaving teaching in Hawaii? Why are they abandoning this profession? And she said, just a casual conversation one day, it'd be interesting to hear the other side. Why are people staying? So I thought, that's a really, really great idea. So I was really totally new to writing, and I still am new to writing, but I just took the opportunity to talk to my friends and colleagues and fellow educators and said, hey, you've been teaching for 15 years. Why are you still teaching? And, I talked to my daughter's kindergarten teacher. I said, you've been teaching for 30 years. Why are you still teaching? And I compiled all these responses. And what it kind of culminated in was a bit of a feel-good piece. It wasn't my intention, but it felt really good. It was like some of the things that people said, well, I teach because I love learning. It keeps me young. I'm always active. I'm always thinking. And, in some senses, it's selfish. I'm keeping myself young and youthful in learning because I love learning with the students. Some other people said, I'm doing it because I believe that, to have an educated people, it keeps our democracy running smoothly and it keeps our nation great. We need to have an educated citizenry to keep our United States wonderful and great the way it is. And then the one that really sticks with me is kind of the one I'll never forget was when I talked to my daughter's kindergarten teacher who had been teaching for 30 years. And he said, you've been doing this a long time. How come you're still teaching? What makes you stay in this field, or what has kept you here for 30 years? And she said, when I'm old and and I look back on my life, I want to know I made a difference. And with teaching, I know I have. And I thought, wow, that's it. That's, above all the other things that we might want to change about the teaching profession, for this one woman, and so it resonated with me as well, is when you look back on your life, have you done something worthwhile? Have you made a difference in this world, a positive impact? And to her, it was yes. And I think to so many of us, it's yes. So that one was that got a lot of positive feedback. I think people just wanted to hear some good news. So that was one. And then the other one that got a bit that I remember kind of resonating with people was I learned a lot about writing during this process. The name you put on your piece is not the name they're going to publish it under. So I called it something different, but Civil Beat called it, when students go home, we go to our second job. So that was, to me, like kind of a no-brainer. Doesn't everybody know that teachers have to work 2 or 3 or 4 jobs to support their family and themselves in Hawaii? Like, why do I even have to say this or write this? But I think it was very well received. Like, you're right. Spring break is coming up, and, as people pack for their trips to the mainland, don't assume teachers are, because they're going to work. Many, many of them. It was the same kind of situation where some of my friends were talking about, oh yeah, I can't go out. I gotta work. And I thought, I wonder how many teachers have second jobs. And everyone I talked to did. And kind of the second piece of it was like, what if we created a system where all these beautiful talents that teachers have, I had a friend who's a Pilates instructor. I had a friend who's a yoga instructor, a friend who's a surf instructor. I have friends who do writing workshops, all these beautiful gifts and talents and passions of the teachers. What if we could just kind of funnel them, not outside the school, but inside the school community, so that we're helping the teachers make a little bit more money, but we're also helping enrich the school community. So right. I still believe that very strongly. We should keep those talents in service to help the teachers and the students.
Yeah. Wow, what a fantastic idea. I love that idea. So, Lory, here's the second part of this question. So at the online platform Medium, you wrote about being, quote, fired or dropped by Civil Beat because your editor was, and I quote, looking for a more eyes wide open, edgier treatment of classroom issues, dealing with the bad as much as the good. So in effect, you did not have enough of an edge in your columns. And this is a bit of a button issue for me because I stopped reading Civil Beat because the articles were so relentlessly critical of education. There just was no other side of it there. So talk to us about your response on Medium to being dropped as a regular columnist at Civil Beat.
Oh, yeah. Well, so it was not, that being let go of Civil Beat. I was really embarrassed because I'd never been fired before, and it just felt really strange. And I actually truly loved it. I loved the opportunity to share my thoughts and reflect. But it was work. It was kind of like, oh wow, it's next month. I have to think of something. But what really got to me was the phrasing and the quote you just shared about dealing with the bad as much as the good and an edgier approach. That's a direct quote. I don't know if that's illegal, but that goes along with doing things you don't know you're not supposed to do. But so that was truly what the editor said to me, and I thought it just infuriated me because who is this editor or any editor to tell a teacher that you have to talk about all the bad stuff? You can't tell us what's really important to you because you know what? That's not important to our readers. But wait a second, if you don't provide it to your readers, they don't know. So, and I respect and appreciate Civil Beat greatly, and I understand, or I guess maybe not understand, but I respect their choices. However, teachers should write. And teachers' writing should be read widely. And it should not just be me. It should be any teacher because so much of our stories are told by others, by reporters, by people who are not in the classroom, people who do not know what it looks like, feels like, sounds like, and that's what we're missing here. Because we don't need a mouthpiece. We need teachers who are writing that are then sharing their direct account. So, and some things are things we might want to change. There are some bad things, but guess what? There are good things too. So the thought of just being fired because it wasn't clickbait was infuriating to me. And to have a teacher's voice removed because because it wasn't talking about, all the bad things going on in public education was very disappointing. So I did, share with them, thank you so much for the opportunity, but I truly hope that you don't overlook bright spots just for clickbait, because there's a lot of great things going on in public education and your readers deserve to know it, because it really does shape public opinion about education.
Right.
So it's kind of their, civic responsibility to share the bright spots. And it shapes policy as well. So I was really, that was a powerful, I had a lot of feeling in that piece. It was more just like just a release. But I think the major message is teachers write it all, write the good, the bad, the ugly, write it all, because you are the only one that can say it. And every teacher story, every single thing that happens in the classroom, that is the data. And if it's not shared with the public, they're missing so much of what's going on, because the teachers and the students are the only ones who can share it.
Yeah, there's two thoughts, Lory. One is that I am very, very encouraged here in 2020 that Civil Beat now has an education beat writer who really understands what fair and balanced means. She's covering everything, no matter good, bad, indifferent, and I'm very encouraged by that. And at the same time, I'm also super encouraged, Lory, by the fact that teachers are using social media platforms like Medium, like Facebook, like Twitter, to get their voices out there so that people who are following can really understand what's going on. So in general, I feel much more encouraged, and I'm back to reading Civil Beats again. So,
I read Civil Beats too.
yeah.
It's on the things I read every morning. So
Right.
yeah, I love it.
Right. So, Lory, I grew up on the windward side of Oahu, the youngest of 9 children. And my family always ate dinner together at night. And conversations typically resembled, Socratic seminars. You wrote a wonderful piece on Medium titled Food for Thought, The Benefits of Family Dinner. So I wonder if you might weave your thoughts in that Medium piece about family meals into your philosophy of education and learning. Like, how do we bring the benefits of family meals into school culture, if you know what I mean? Like, what are the correlations?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question. I think it comes with the philosophy of, listening, right? And it kind of comes back to, students having voice and taking, really acknowledging that time when you are talking and sharing is a valid time. I think that, we talk about formative assessments, summative assessments, and we have worksheets and workbooks and online programs, and all those things have their place. But it's all coming back to, the importance of actually listening, thinking, speaking, and being safe. So for me, there's been some really fantastic programs that we've experimented with at Waikiki School that actually bring families together at dinner time at our school to do something like that, to come together as a school community and sit and talk together. And it was called the Family Dinner Project. There's actually a national program called the Family Dinner Project. So,
Wow.
But yeah, it's really cool. We've kind of had to take a hiatus from that, but it has happened here, and hopefully it will happen again. But also, what I do, my philosophy for children, there's a lot of discussion in educator circles about homework, right? And so I am of the belief that I don't want to assign any busy work homework. Actually, I'd rather not assign any homework. But something that I always do assign every week is, okay, here's what we talked about in our philosophy for children circle. It is a dinner discussion topic. Take it to your house and talk to your families about it at dinner. Now that's like I said in the piece, it's hard because not everybody eats together.
Right.
Not everybody has time. Not everybody has space. But it's something that I encourage the families to do. Here's a dinner discussion. It might be a breakfast discussion. It might be some other time it's car discussion as you're driving. Talk about it. Hear what your child has to say. Hear what he heard from his or her classmates, and talk about it. And then there's a piece that says, the families they write down on this little form like what they said about the topic we all discussed. So it kind of invites the families into this homework. And the homework is talking. And then there's a written component where the parents, have to write down, oh, we talked about what it would be like if you switch bodies. And that, I thought it would be a good idea, but my husband thought it would be a terrible idea. So, there is that part of it. So it's just kind of coming back to, prioritizing and what's important. And back to the 4 things: listening, speaking, thinking, and being safe. There's all these other content things that we cover, but the overarching things that will never change are those 4 things, and you can apply them in any way. And, during this pandemic, I think it might be a great time for educators to kind of leverage the situation we're in and say, okay, your homework is talk about this with your family and record their responses and bring it back to us on Friday, and we'll all share what our families said, because we're all together now. We're at home a lot. So maybe that could be a way to, leverage this kind of new situation we're in and invite the families into our discussions.
Right. Wow, that's so cool, Lory. I feel like, once again, we're back on that train again, and we've come from Uzbekistan and Tonga and Boston, and what's emerging here in this episode is, your philosophy of education and who you are as a person and what you value and what your practice is as an educator. That's very, very cool. So, Lory, I taught at La Pietra, Hawaii School for Girls, for 8 years, and La Pietra is just down the road or up the road from Waikiki Elementary. I'm also the very proud father of a daughter who teaches kindergarten in California. And you wrote a piece on mother.ly about gender expectations. And I want to read a quote from your article. So here's the quote. We need to think deeply on the small everyday things we say and do to begin to rectify the massive wrongs that have been done to our daughters, sisters, mothers, grandmothers, wives, and friends for far too long. We need to rethink how we talk to our girls to avoid reinforcing gender stereotypes that have contributed to where we are today. So, Lory, what does this quote mean in the broader context of public and private and charter school education cultures? Like when you talk about where we are today, where are we today in our schools? And what steps can teachers take to move us to a better place on this gender expectation question?
Yeah, this one's really this is a tough one because I'm still in it, thinking of it. And the piece that I wrote came very, a lot of my pieces come, kind of from my heart. And it started with my daughters. And I was kind of making some startling discoveries about how I spoke to them. And not only, first it started with listening to how other people spoke to them. And I thought, wow, they're always being compared to boys, but that's so, what does that mean? What do you mean by boy behavior and girl behavior? And then I realized that I was also saying things that maybe communicated not a message I didn't want to communicate, like sit like a lady or, things like that just kind of came out, or, oh yeah, she's a tomboy, those kind of things. But really all these behaviors that our girls exhibit, they're not boy behavior or girl behaviors. They're just behaviors. But we're so entrenched in kind of our gender expectations that the smallest things we do, the way we speak, can really contribute to kind of a child assuming a role, right? If you constantly hear at school, they're just being boys, or, watch out for the boys at recess, they're so rowdy. Then it's like, okay, well, boys are rowdy and girls are, not, maybe. Right. So I think, I remember being in graduate school at UH, and I was being observed by my one of my professors. And one of the things that I got feedback on was, you keep calling everybody guys. Don't call them guys. Think about your words. And I was kind of miffed, like, that's just how I talk, what do you mean? I have to, but I think, it's a very, very valid point. And it's very complex now too, because we're kind of emerging into a better understanding of gender. What do you mean, boy, girl, what's a boy thing? What's a girl thing? Should we, into dividing the groups? Okay, boys go over here, girls go over here, or, okay, boys turn in your papers first and girls turn in your papers, just that way of kind of structuring your classroom procedures. Right. We're learning that's not really inviting or acknowledging or honoring all our students. We're learning this now. And I think some of the students we have are asking those questions of themselves. Like, who am I? Why do I feel so strange when she says, okay, girls go over to this side, and I don't feel like I should go over there because I look like a girl and I have the biology of a girl, but I don't, those kind of questions, and kind of understanding that it's much less black and white than what we first thought. So I don't really have an answer, but it kind of goes back to just reflection and trying to be aware that, we all want to honor and celebrate and appreciate all of our students. And that kind of, you have to be very deeply reflective, because the smallest things we say matter a lot, even down to, saying guys instead of friends, or, different things you might say that are more inclusive. So it's, I think that after that question, I think I'm emerging with more questions, but I think it's just really important to be aware again of the harm that teachers can unwittingly do to the kids entrusted to their care.
Yeah, the guys thing is an interesting thing for me. I mean, I say that as naturally as I breathe, and then it was pointed out to me, and I shifted to using folks. So, hey, folks, and that feels a little bit more comfortable, but still, it's difficult to reverse something that you've been doing all of your life. But here we are in this moment, and we're waking up to all kinds of things. So that's super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's hard work.
Yeah. So, Lory, up to now, we've not tackled the COVID-19 pandemic directly, which was actually by design. Sometimes I feel like we are awash in 1,000 opinions and contentions across so many media platforms, so much so that it has become like white noise. But for all those elementary school educators out there listening to this episode, what are your thoughts on learning in the time of a pandemic? What are some insights from your side of the equation that might support other educators struggling to master this moment?
Okay, I think for me, the first thing is we're not going to master this moment. We're just going to live in it and be a part of it and shape it. And I've thought about this a lot, and I'm even reluctant to say it, but I think in some senses, the pandemic is in some ways making me a better teacher. And I hope the students feel that way too. And I'll explain that a little more. This year, as we started our year, everything was totally different. The students were not coming face to face. It was dropped on us in last minute. We had to pivot again. But what we did as a grade level and my school, and I have to shout out to my colleagues and my principal, just amazing, supportive people. What we did was we had, one-to-one virtual meetings with the families, and they went to, about a half hour, 45 minutes, somewhere even an hour, where we, arranged a virtual meeting with each family, and we talked to them. And we actually talked to some of the folks over at Hawaii Technology Academy, and they helped us understand what worked for them, because they've been doing this longer than we have. And we talked about the idea of being a learning coach and setting up a learning space. But really the beauty of it was that, hey, I know these people really well, even before we start class. I talked to the mom, I talked to the dad, I talked to the kid, and we talked at great length. And the first question I asked in all these meetings was, I first started with the student. How do you feel about school and distance learning this year? And I heard, they told me, so that's one thing I think is better. Before the school year even starts, I know I've made a connection with the families and the students. Right. Second thing I'm optimistic about is small groups. So we're doing these virtual meetings, and I have an amazing administrator who's allowing us to use Zoom and breakout sessions, and we're doing it. So kids are going into these breakout rooms. They're talking together. I am going into a breakout room with a small group of 3 kids. So smaller group. We've also divided our groups so that we have an A and B, and I have 10 students in one group and 10 in another, which we've always wanted smaller class size.
Right.
And now we have it. It is different, but we have it. So making that parent connection, smaller groups, individualized instruction, and elevating student voice. So now we don't have the paper pencil stuff as much as we used to. So now we have Flipgrid and Padlet. And again, back to the administrator, giving us, support and saying, yep, if you think that's a good platform for your students to share their voice, go for it. So we're doing it. Kids are sharing their work on Padlet and Flipgrid. They're recording their voices. For the EL students who have trouble writing, they can speak it. So these things, I think, are making me a better teacher. Now, are there drawbacks? Yes. Do our students miss each other? Yes. So, it's kind of a process, but I'm starting with just making a strong family connection and making as many small group talking opportunities as I can. I think that's what the kids and myself need right now.
That's fantastic, Lory. Thank you. Those are very specific suggestions that are actionable for sure. That's great. So, Lory, we've actually arrived at question number 10. This is amazing. It's gone by so fast. So this one's kind of a big one. So almost 2 years ago, Lory, our Hawaii State Department of Education, which oversees close to 300 public and public charter schools, and that means 13,000 teachers and approximately 185,000 students, embarked on a statewide plan called the 5 Promises. The goal was and is to make good on these promises by 2030, which is just 10 years from now. So the 5 general promises include the Nā Ho'opena'au protocols, equity, innovation, school design, and empowerment. So frankly, Lory, I am encouraged by the idea that instead of stressing over achievement gaps, we're talking about making real promises to our kids. So let's imagine it's 2030, 10 years from now, and you are writing a series of articles for the National Board for Certified Teachers. And what are you seeing 10 years from now? What are you feeling? What are you experiencing in Hawaii's public schools that will come through in these future articles?
Well, what I'd like to see, there's so many things. I'd like to, and I think we're in a really, really pivotal point right now in our education system where I think here in Hawaii and nationwide and worldwide, frankly, education is going to be kind of flipped around, shaken up, and reevaluated. It's kind of been forced upon us, but we've kind of, at least I have wanted to ask a lot of these questions for many, many years. So what I'm hoping we'll see in 10 years in Hawaii is a lot more equity. We're having some issues with that now, and it's become very apparent in the current pandemic where some students have everything they need to learn and some students don't. And I think in 10 years, the best possible outcome would be every student has the technology and the access that they need to learn from any place. School design, we're talking about building community organization partnerships and apprenticeships. I would like to see a lot more of that at every level. And as an elementary educator, I'd like to see that starting younger. So what I would like to see in 10 years is, okay, we have this, maybe a whole day out of the week is just your internship day. Maybe you go and work in the garden. Maybe you go and work in the caf. Maybe you go and work over at the zoo nearby. Like a whole, build that into school design. That's what we do. And it can start young. And then kind of streamline the way to incorporate community partnerships. There's a lot of barriers that could hold that up. So if we streamline that, that would be great for all students. And I'd like to see that. Empowerment. I would like to see teachers empowered to do these, and the students empowered both to do these self-directed lessons of study. And that should be valid. And we should have a plan for that. And I think that would be the most impactful type of learning that we could have for our students. I would also like to empower and streamline the way that teachers could take sabbaticals to to get the professional development that they want. And not just from a 20-minute course online, but from taking time off, traveling, or staying here and just really engaging in something that will then enrich their ability to teach the students. And I know that the way that teachers take sabbaticals need to be streamlined, and it should be encouraged. I think that would really enrich everyone. And then innovation, the sky's the limit, right? So we talk about project-based learning, really utilize the things we have here in Hawaii, and that other places don't have at all. I mean, we could have student scientists, discovering things that could help our island home. So, and then again, the last would be Hawaii. Like, let's leverage all the wonderful people that we have here. We don't need to look outside for people to teach us what we have right under our nose. So bring our kupuna into the classroom and bring our students out of the classroom to spend time with the kupuna, to talk with the kupuna, to learn from them. So a lot more of all of that, and a lot less money spent on standardized testing, and just really legitimize these important ways of learning, and have it not be so test-based.
Right.
Because that's where a lot of our money and effort and everything is kind of all wrapped into. So if we could just kind of blow the top off school, it would be great for everyone.
Lory, you mentioned Cecilia Chung earlier in this conversation. She's our 2020 Hawaii State Teacher of the Year. And I'm very proud to say she's a former student of mine from La Pietra.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, it's so awesome. So Cece and I were having coffee a couple of years ago, and I remember asking her, she was teaching at Kaimiloa Elementary, and I said, Cece, like, if we're to throw out the ways that schools are evaluated and let you develop a top 5 list, what are the top 5 things that you would want your school to be evaluated on? And she placed in that top 5 list community connections, meaning that when it comes time to evaluate the success or the progress of your school, it's the number of really authentic community connections that you have to businesses, to nonprofits, to programs, anything that might actually benefit your school. And I was reminded of that while you were talking about those kinds of connections that you have. Like, what are some of the really cool connections that Waikiki Elementary has with its surrounding community?
Oh, wow. Waikiki is doing really well in this capacity. We have a strong relationship with the aquarium. We have students that go there once a week in the past years, and now we're working on a way of kind of figuring that out now. We also have a connection with Papahana Kuaola, where that's basically the whole 4th grade curriculum was doing a 10-week study where we go on hikes, we go to the Lory, we have the kupuna come into the classroom. We have a connection with the zoo that's really robust. And we have a very, very strong relationship with the Uehiro Academy at UH. Right. So that's the Philosophy for Children program over there. And actually so much so that for the past, I think, 12 or 15 years, a very long time, teachers from Waikiki School go to Japan every summer for 2 weeks to share about P4C Hawaii and learn from Japanese educators.
Wow.
And I was able to do that 2 years ago, and it was incredible. And we're also a very open school. We have been historically. Things are a little bit different now, but we have visitors. I mean, it's just open. I'll have P4C, and I'll have a visitor almost every week. And it's so much so that I have a guest book, started a guest book, so that I could just keep track of who are these lovely people. And they're predominantly Japanese professors who come to Hawaii to learn about philosophy for children. But that's a very robust relationship we have. And we have mentors that come to our school and are pretty much in residence here. And that has been amazing for the teachers to, just grow and build on their philosophy for children practice, because they have the mentors and they have each other to bounce ideas off of. So there's still lots more we can do, but I mean, that's our philosophy, make the connections and grow together.
Wow. You know, I had a similar conversation with a group of faculty at Alawai Elementary, which is just down the road from you. And they also mentioned the community connections as well, that was something that they wanted to be evaluated on. And they put up this matrix in front of me of all of these connections that they'd made. And I was astonished. It was just amazing. The Alawai Watershed Project, the aquarium. It was just, and just think of what that means for the kids to be able to connect with these organizations and programs and to know what's going on. So that's very cool. So Lory, as we come down to the end here, I want to ask you one more thing, but I'm going to set it up with a quick story. So my day job here, I work at Apple at Ala Moana, the Ala Moana Center. And of course, the great love of my life is doing this podcast. But at my day job, I have a colleague. And this colleague's daughter actually goes to Waikiki Elementary. And I'm Instagram friends with this colleague. And I remember one night, this was about a year ago, when he posted a photo of his daughter holding a special certificate. And she had been named Mindful Student of the Month. And, you know, throw out all the other evaluations and grades and or marks or anything, this colleague of mine was just over the moon about this thing that this distinction that she had gotten. So this is my opportunity to ask you about something that I think is truly remarkable, which is that Waikiki Elementary has a mindfulness center on campus. So if you could talk about that a little bit, that would be a great way to bring this conversation to a close.
Yeah. So, you know, when Cece was talking about how she would want the school to be measured, and my response to that high up on the list would be the dispositions and attitudes that our students leave with.
Right.
And at our school at Waikiki, we have the mindful habits, and it's the backbone, it's the umbrella, it's everything to us, and it's in every lesson and every way we speak and how we celebrate our students. So the mindful habits, just to name a few, would be flexibility in thinking, or using humor and joy, or thinking about your thinking, or being a responsible risk taker. And it's so infused in how we teach and how we interact with each other that it's not just something we say, it's something we live. And when I came here, over 6 years ago, I didn't know anything about it. And guess what? I didn't receive any formal training at all. I just lived it and learned it. And now my children go here, and we talk this way every day. I remember being at the airport several years ago, and there was a delay. We were on our way back from Boston back to Hawaii, and there was a delay, and they were asking for people to give up their seat and take a later flight. And I heard a family say to their mother and father say to the children, let's be flexible in our thinking. Let's take the later flight so we can get, the credit for a new flight. And I thought to myself, they are from Waikiki School, and lo and behold, they were. So it's not just the students, it's the teachers, it's the families. We all not only talk the talk, but we walk the walk. It's deeply entrenched. It starts at kindergarten. Actually, it starts at preschool. So we have the Mindful Learning Center, which is just an amazing place. So we have a preschool here, and it's housed in the Mindful Learning Center. We actually have students physically on campus all through the week there. But in the after hours, pre-pandemic, there were also just amazing community partnerships there. We had a kupuna program where we had a kupuna and keiki playing ukulele together. It was just a free program. You could just sign up and go there, and you would have your, tutu and your kid learning ukulele together. There's language classes there. So it's just this, it's kind of starting to make reality that idea of keeping all the talents together and making it a really all-encompassing school community where we have all these opportunities right in one place. So it's a really special school, and it's a lot of because of these dispositions that we embrace, and we are. Art Costa is the man who started us with these dispositions over 30 years ago. And he comes to us every year, and he doesn't come so much as a prescribed professional development practitioner. He comes as a friend. I mean, it's really special. It's really special. It's kind of, it brings back the humanity into teaching and learning, and I think that is something that we should all aspire to is, remember, first and foremost, we're all a human community, and just kind of start with that and go from there.
That's fantastic. Lory, thank you so much for this conversation today. I would love to invite you back to be perhaps the final guest in this season, which would be next April. If you're willing, I would love to do that interview at the very end of season 2, and we can catch up on what's going to happen this year. And there were so many other questions I wanted to ask you today anyway, based on your writing. So there's lots that we could talk about, but let's get together again in April and we'll do the last episode of the season if you're willing to do that.
Yeah, this was a true joy. I truly appreciate it. And if I may, Josh, I'm kind of dorky, but I really like poetry. And to any educator who is listening to this, I just want to read one short paragraph from a poem that I read every year at the beginning of school. And it's called To Be of Use by Marge Percy.
Perfect.
And I'm just going to read one little excerpt. The people I love the best jump into work head first. I love people who harness themselves to an ox like an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. So that's just an excerpt, but I'd like to, just honor, I'm just one of so many incredible teachers who do what has to be done with massive patience again and again. So I think, just to be here is a pleasure, but it's really an honor to work among all these amazing, hardworking, patient educators that are doing what has to be done again and again.
Awesome. Thank you, Lory, for all you're doing on behalf of our young learners. And please, you and your family stay safe.
Thank you so much.
And now it's time for a listener review. This one comes from the Trav H.I., who, as it turns out, was one of my former students at La Pietra, Hawaii School for Girls. In the Test podcast, Josh mentioned a moment in time where he took learning to another level with online discussions and taking learning beyond the four walls of the classroom at LP. I was there 18 years ago when he had the courage to make a difference. Looking forward to listening to all the segments hosted by Josh. He is an innovative, deep thinker. Wow, this review makes my day. Thank you, the Trav H.I. I promise to keep taking this series to another level for you and for all the educators out there who we call our listeners. The What School Could Be in Hawaii podcast is brought to you by Josh Rappoon Productions. Your host is me, Josh Rappoon. My editor, show consultant, and sound engineer is Daniel Gilad at DG Sound Creations. Daniel, an amazing musician, created the original music heard in these episodes. To learn more about Daniel or to hire him for your next music gig, see our show notes, where you will find his email address and Facebook URL. This series is funded by Education Change Agent Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the documentary film Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the bestseller What School Could Be. Send your feedback to mltsinhawaii@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at mltsinhawaii. If you like this series, give us a rating and review at your favorite podcast store. Finally, please like our Most Likely to Succeed in Hawaii Facebook page and YouTube channel. Until the next episode, please stay safe, wear your masks, keep socially distant, and be kind to one another. Our world needs an abundance of kindness and compassion right now. See you soon.